All right, so for this week's project, we're going to be taking a look at this Pioneer car stereo. This is model KE-3333, and this is a viewer submitted unit. This comes from Steve. He lives in Oklahoma. He got in touch with me about taking a look at this for him. He's complaining that whether it be the tape or the tuner, one side of this or one channel of it doesn't sound very good. And so a couple of things do come to mind. It could possibly be something related to the AFPO. It could be a preamp problem. So those are the kind of the things that just first come to mind. But we'll figure all that out once we get it opened up and get it hooked up and see if we can duplicate what he's talking about. Our intro music this week, we're checking out the 1988 Bad Company album, Dangerous Age. And of course, this would have been after Paul Rodgers had left and he was replaced with Brian Howe. And they made quite a few albums with Brian during the 80s. And this was the first one that really caught my attention. I think there was one prior to this, maybe two, but this is the one that caught my attention first for the song No Smoke Without a Fire. So let's check out a little bit of this and then we'll get started on the Pioneer. All right, let's pick back up and we'll take a quick look at the front of the unit here and the buttons they provided. Actually, very nice radio, very clean looking in the face here. Over on the far left, they give you something called BSM. I'm not sure what that is. We'd have to look that up. Clock, seek, and local, I guess, LOC. Then right here, we have the 6 preset stations for this one. And then we have the fast forward rewind, which also serve as eject if you push them simultaneously, followed by the direction button right below the preset buttons. Don't see any provisions here for Dolby noise reduction or metal tape capability, but this probably was just kind of an entry-level radio. And I'm sure these shafts serve at multiple functions, probably balance, bass and treble, maybe fader and tuning up and down. Let's flip it around and we'll have a look at the back of it. This was an early adopter of preamp out. These still have the protection cases on the ends of the female jacks, so these have never been used probably. And then of course we have 2 grays and 2 greens for right and left front and right and left rear. And I'm not sure which green or gray is right or left. And then we have a common negative wire for all 4 speakers, common ground for all 4 speakers. He did himself a favor by installing a separate ground wire for the power of the radio. And the power is coming through, of course, basically this is going to be your switch 12 through the ignition switch. He probably left the other part in his truck to make it easier for him when he gets it back. And then, of course, we have the memory backup wire. And as with pretty much all the Pioneers from back in this time, or I believe all of them, there's I believe it's either a 1 or a 10K resistor in here to drop the voltage and or current for the memory backup. And then, of course, the standard Motorola type antenna connections. So very nice radio, very clean. It'll be a pleasure to work on this. It's not all filthy. So let's go ahead and get some speakers hooked up to it and see if we can find out what he's talking about. So give me a moment for that and we'll pick back up. All right, let's pick back up on the Pioneer. Got it hooked up. Got the power supply involved here. Bench speakers hooked up to the left and the right. And here's what we got. All right, that's the good channel. Here's the bad channel. So clearly quite distorted in the one channel, just as he says. So let's go ahead and at this point, let's go ahead and get, what I want to do is we're going to pull the signal tracer over here out, and I want to tap it into the preamp out and see what that sounds like. And that will kind of tell us whether we're dealing with the amplifier or the preamp. So give me a second for that and we'll get that hooked up. All right, let's go ahead and pick back up. Basically what we got going on here is we're just going to utilize the signal coming out of the preamp out of the radio. Got that jacked into this cable, right and left. On the other side of the cable, we got two 3.5 mono plugs here. And this is going to be our good channel. We've got our signal tracer on.
Purchase any vehicle and receive a 55-inch 4K smart TV for only $10.
So that's going to be our left channel. The right channel, which is the yellow plug here, we've got a little red mark here to let us know that that's the right channel. So this is what we got. So clearly coming right out of the preamp as well, so we're going to go ahead and conclude that most likely we don't have anything wrong with the amplifier chip here, so it's definitely something in the preamp. That AFPO down in there looks like a Toshiba one. I can't tell exactly. It's pretty crammed down in there, but there's some supporting circuitry there. We're going to find something going on with that. Either we got an open trace or an open cap or an open resistor, something of that nature. And this radio, unfortunately, does not have a removable bottom panel, so we're going to have to disassemble the whole thing. So I tell you what, let's go ahead, we'll set you up on the overhead and we'll go ahead and start tearing this down. So give me a moment for that and we'll pick back up. Let's go ahead and pick back up. I went ahead and took a look at this, and there is like a small sub chassis within this bottom piece. So I think the first thing, let's go ahead and remove the wiring clip and get that out of our way. And I'm going to take off this back grounding wire as well. Make sure we don't lose the screw. And right here, you can kind of see, I don't know, I get something to poke at it with. Right here, you can kind of see that there's kind of a sub frame that comes around on both sides. Even one here that this, is tethered. This antenna line is tethered to. So we're going to try to remove the bottom as easily as possible. But I'm sure we're going to need to pull the cassette mechanism out. And the first thing I want to look at is how we're going to get the front face off. Some of these just have a tab and they just pull off. And this one is the case as well. There's a tab right down in here. I don't know if you can see it or not. We should be able to ajar that and loosen up the front piece. There's one on the other side and it falls right off. And then of course we have some screws here holding in the cassette mechanism, and there's going to be a couple of plugs we'll want to be particularly careful with. So before we get the screws out, let's go ahead and see if we can get these pulled up. That wasn't too bad. And as you would imagine, those were in there pretty tight. Now we should be able to easily lift this out of there. And we'll be coming back to this a little later on to have a look at the belt in this. I tried the tape deck, it does work fine, but we'll want to take a look at that. But now that we have that out, let's just take a little glance here and see if we see anything right off the get-go. Now, I did notice we do have a TA7558P, that's an op amp. That would definitely be indicative of a symptom of a bad op amp. I'm not saying it's bad, but it's definitely something we want to look at. We won't look at it first. The first thing I want to look at is we're going to start running some of these caps through here, because those are the things that would have aged and potentially created the problem. But first we got to finish getting the rest of it apart. And so the next step, we're going to pull these two screws out here and here to help loosen up the bottom cover of it. And even though there is kind of a little sub-assembly right here, the two screws that hold the AFPO to that go all the way through to the back cover, so we're going to have to remove those. And we'll probably need a little stouter screwdriver for that. And those are a little longer because they have to go through more stuff. And then we have a screw here that's going to need to come out as well. It does feel loose. Like it wants to come apart. And I don't see anything else that's holding it. So it's probably just nice and stiff from being in there so many years, I guess. All right, well, to avoid me fumbling around with this for 5 minutes, because I ain't gonna put any pressure on it, I'm just gonna kind of play with it a little bit until it kind of comes out. Then I'll pick back up with you once I have it out of there. All right, so I'm gonna pick back up with you. I went ahead and got it out of the main frame here. You can see there's a little tab right there. That little tab has to be straightened out. They've got it crooked into a little place right here on the circuit board. So that's what was holding the whole thing in. So I decided I would take a visual scan of the whole deal. And this is something that you always want to do. You want to make sure that there isn't anything loose that could be creating your problem. And it's very possible it could be. And so I scanned over the entire back side of this board and didn't really see anything. I noticed that there was a pretty good solder job done on the AFPO here, so it made me question as to maybe it had been changed before. I don't think so. I think this is from the factory. But just looking everything over, I didn't see anything on the back side. But I got up to the top side of the board and I started looking around in this area right here. Well, I started looking first right down through here by that op amp. That op amp was of considerable interest to me from the problem that we were having, but I didn't know, so I just started looking around, And I got to the point where we're right up here on top of the volume control and the fader control. And what I seen, and it's going to be really difficult for this camera to pick it up. I had to magnify it with my external lens that I use here to do this kind of thing with. But if I bring in through this lens, well, let's see if the camera will cooperate. It is easy to see. I don't know if it is the problem, but it is definitely a problem. We have multiple crack connections right there in that little wiring bundle of cables coming up from the main board into this volume control. I mean, there is several, not just one, but like 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 there that don't look too good. So I don't know if it's the problem, but it is definitely a problem, and it's one that I want to go ahead and get soldered up. And let's recheck our operation and see if we get our other channel back. But yeah, there's definitely something going on there. It's a little bundle of wiring going down to the main board here, which is all in this little tone control circuit, I would imagine. I haven't seen a manual on this, but just based on what's there, it looks to be tone control preamp type stuff. So yeah, let's go ahead and see if we can get these mopped up, and we'll give it one more shot. Otherwise, we'll continue on our way. So give me a moment for that, and we'll pick back up. All right, as we come back in, went ahead and got all of our connections soldered up. Halfway through this process, this guy over here decided it was going to stop working, which has been kind of an ongoing intermittent thing for a while now. I believe it's the sensor in the handpiece that's causing the problem. I had to go back to this is the original handpiece. I had a new one, and basically it went nuts and spiked the temperature of the heater and opened up the heater. So I had to go back to the old handpiece, but this has since been replaced. There's a new one on the way, not a Zytronics. I went with, ECG makes one that has an analog control on it, and it was pretty reasonably priced, so I purchased it. So we're going to try that out. But this soldering station has been down the road with me for quite a few years, probably about 20 plus years, and it's been very reliable up until probably about the last year. It's been having some issues on and off, so I figured it was time to replace it with something different. I could have got a Weller. I could have got pretty much any one I wanted, but I didn't want anything too fancy. I just wanted an analog control. I didn't want a digital readout or anything like that, so that's why I went with the cheaper one. Now let's take a look over here. We got this all soldered up. It looks pretty good. I'm sure the camera's not going to be able to really show us up close here. We might be able to come in with our magnifying lens and get a little better look at it maybe. And you can see we got them all pretty good right there. And I decided I'd just go ahead and go over the entire board. I went ahead and went over every connection on this board. This is the one that's basically manipulated the most. It has the power, the volume, and the tone control on it. So this one's touched a lot, so I wanted to make sure there wasn't going to be any further issues with this one. I went over to the other side, didn't see anything over there, so we're going to leave that alone for now. And I'm going to go ahead and get this put back into the frame, and we're going to get this thing fired up and see if our other channel comes back or if we need to go a little further. So give me a few minutes for that, and we'll pick back up. All right, as we come back in, got everything reassembled. Only got a couple of screws in the cassette because we know we want to take that apart and have a look at the belt, but everything else is put back in place, and here's where we're at. That's going to be your left channel there. That's going to be your right channel. So I guess we didn't have to make this one too terrible. Just some loose connections here on this control causing that issue, but everything seems to be working as it should. All right, well, we won't dwell on that for too long. Let's go ahead and pull the cassette back out. Let's have a look at the belt. We'll also want to take a look at the heads, make sure those are not dirty and get those cleaned up. So give me a second for that, and we'll get into the cassette. All right, let's pick back up, and we're going to have a look at his cassette assembly here. Basically, we're going to take this cover off and have a look at the belt. I've kind of looked down inside here, didn't really see any excessive issues with dirt. All the parts seem to be moving pretty fluidly, so we're not going to mess with any of that. But we do want this off so we can see where that, what condition that belt's in. There's a screw here on the back, and then there's one on the side right here. So let's go ahead and pull those out. All right, let's see how this seems to just slide apart just like that. And we can kind of get a look, and this one has two belts in it. Let's take a look at the first one here. Still very pliable. This belt looks to be in real good shape for the age. There ain't no doubt about that. I mean, seriously. I mean, there's hardly any kind of indentation in the belt. Maybe just a little bit of one, maybe. But otherwise, this is still perfectly round and perfectly pliable. I mean, it's got great pop back characteristics, whatever you want to call that, elasticity, I guess you would say. This one's still nice and snug here too. Here. I think that what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use my rubber renew, and we're going to recondition these. I'm going to put these back in here. I can't see charging him for something that he doesn't really need. There is no problem with this belt at all. No problem. And I'm pretty picky. If there was any kind of trouble with it, I would change it. But I don't see any issues with this whatsoever. So we'll clean those up and put them back. Otherwise, it's really hard to clean the heads on one of these with the head retracted back inside here, and it's really almost impossible to kind of get it with the camera. But what we're going to do is I'm going to get a Q-tip, and we're going to clean that up just a little bit. I noticed that when I was playing side 2 of the tape, it sounded a little muddy, like there might be some oxide buildup on it, and that's possible. So let's hit it with this real quick and see what happens. And there is, you can see a little yellow there. So there was some tape residue on the head. Yeah, you can see it there. I don't know if the camera can show it, but yeah, there's some residue that was on the head. And I thought that the side 1 sounded fine, but side 2 had a little muddy sound to it, so we'll just take care of that. I don't know how much I can show you on the camera. I don't know how much the camera will pick up. The pressure rollers look to be in pretty good shape. I mean, every pressure roller you see in these car decks, it always looks a little hard and a little glazed over. And this one does have some residue on it. But it's been my experience that what my best bet to do with these is probably just leave them alone and let them be. Because it's possible that if we ever got rubber renew on that pressure roller and couldn't get it all cleaned off, we don't want to get it on the cap stands and have to start that process of messing with that. So I think the best thing for us to do is just leave them alone. They don't look that bad. I did a car stereo not too long ago. I didn't do a video on it, but it was an old Alpine one from back in, I think, the late 70s or early 80s, and the pressure rollers were pretty much petrified. And so I didn't even mess with them. once the belt was changed and the tape was playing, it sounded fine, so I just left it as is. So we'll leave these as is, and I'm going to go ahead and get these belts cleaned up. We're just going to use a little of the MG rubber renew on these, and these should be perfectly fine. They have great properties to them still. So give me a few minutes for that. We'll get the cassette wrapped up, and then we'll get the radio wrapped up. So pick back up with you in just a few minutes. All right, so we're picking back up, having a look, or a final look, at our Pioneer KE-3333 car stereo here. And I want to thank you guys for checking out the video this week. Also want to thank Steve. Appreciate you reaching out to me about getting this one taken care of for you. Got an easy one on this one, nothing too terrible. Just some loose connections in that volume tone control assembly there. And was pleasantly surprised that the unit didn't have any burned out light bulbs in the front. That's usually a given that you'll find at least one, but this one, all of them working fine. So everything still in real good shape for the age of the radio. Now for our final test, I've got it routed over to the mixer using the preamp out connections of the radio. We don't need to have the actual bench speakers going. We had an issue with the preamp and not an issue with the main amp, so we'll do that for the final test, and we'll go ahead and check the balance real quick here. All that seems to be working just fine. So I think for our final play test, I don't have a whole lot of store-bought cassettes left in my collection, maybe 10 or 15. Most of those I've already changed over to compact disc or bought on vinyl at one point or another, but I still do have this one, and this is the one we're going to use. This is from the band Tall Stories, and in case you don't know who this band is, the lead singer, his name is Steve Jerry, I believe that's how you pronounce it. He would go on, of course, to take Steve Perry's place in Journey. He was the guy that was the first lead singer after Perry, not the kid that's doing it now. And I really loved the album that they did with him. I believe it was called Arrival, and I believe they had an actual second album with him as well. But I guess he figured or found out that the touring schedule for Journey is just probably a little more than he wanted to commit to. And so he would leave the band, and then that's when they brought in Arnell, I believe. So we're going to check out the first song on this. This is called Wild on the Run. And we'll play a little bit of this on the way out.